We're delighted to be here. We are a faculty librarian team that was thrown together. We didn't even really know each other before we were invited to give this talk, and it's been really interesting to have discussions amongst ourselves. My name is Amy Freund. I am an associate professor in the art history department. My field, not that it matters very much, is 18th century French art.
And I am Megan Heuer. I'm Director of Educational Initiatives for SMU Libraries, and I'm also a subject librarian in the social sciences.
So we have the full humanities, social science range. We have an art practitioner in the audience here. What are the people on Zoom? What are your disciplines?
People in Zoom, do you want to share? You should be able to try to unmute yourself.
I see.
And then
English.
We have English and we have, well, engineering education, right? Kellen, are you under the Kurth Institute of Engineering Education?
We have absolutely no overlap in disciplines among the attendees and the presenters, so we're going to get a really wide variety of input.
Yeah,
that makes for the most interesting conversations because you can learn a lot when you hear about research from other disciplines. It helps put you in the student's perspective of like they're having to cross all these different areas and negotiate all of that. So
we want to start off actually with a question for everybody in the room and on Zoom, because I know what my research projects like, and Megan knows what like poli-sci research projects are like. But what does a research project look like for you?
What do I put myself on? Well, my personal research projects, I usually take the model of the sciences.
Mm-hmm.
So I identify a gap in the knowledge, then I start creating thinking about a research question and thinking about designing a methodology,
mm-hmm.
To get to the answers that for the questions that I formulated.
And what do you tell your students? Like when you're encouraging students to do research in your classes, what do those projects look like for them?
Right now, I'm not doing that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of we will start that with an MFA student.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So you're here to explore what that might look
Yes.
like.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm here to.
Folks on Zoom, what are your research? When you give your students a research project, what does that look like for you? Actually, yeah, that's good.
And then I have here, my students write 8 to 10 page research papers using multiple peer-reviewed secondaries to make arguments about literature.
Yes, the classic.
Yes,
I like to call that one.
I'm a classic person too. That's what a lot of my research projects looks like as well. We asked to get the discussion going, but also because just as Megan said, there are a lot of different final products that we ask our students to produce. And what we developed together was a sort of set of recommendations that can be adapted, we think, to many different disciplines. But you tell us if this is like, oh, we would never do that in our class. That would be a really interesting feedback for us too.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think teaching research is a process, starts long before the students sit down to write a research paper.
Podcast, great.
Podcast episodes. That's awesome. That's very cool.
Sorry, we're reading Zoom comments as we're up here. Okay. It's a process, one that starts long before the students sit down.
Yeah. And I think it's really helpful to think of it this way. This is kind of how I talk about it with faculty and I talk about it with students. We all get so focused on the end product of getting that research paper, getting that good, research that you want to see. And when we focus so heavily, and of course the students focus on that because they want an A or a B or whatever their desired grade is. If we focus so heavily only on the end product, we're kind of missing all of the things, the building blocks that the students need in order to actually elicit that good research. And so we're going to turn it on its head, and we're going to talk a lot today about focusing on it as a process and how do we develop those skills. And it kind of shifts how we think about those research assignments, that we're focusing more on skills development and not on rules by which we want students to develop the product we want to see. That's a very kind of different shift. If I focus on how are they moving through that process and how am I helping them develop those skills, hopefully at the end, they will come out with something that looks like good research.
So our next step is actually to throw a question out to you again. Sorry, you're gonna have to work a lot in this workshop. So one thing we wanted to hear from you, and we can provide our own answers too, is what do your students need to know? What do you think they need to know to conduct the successful research in your undergrad class, whether it's the 8 to 10 page paper or identifying the gap in the knowledge that you want students to fill, or working toward the podcast? What do you think students need to know?
I think the process,
Mhm.
right? What are they expected to do? If they are novice learners, they don't know the process to get to that end result.
Mhm.
So having an outline of what they have to do in the process and breaking it down
Mhm.
with opportunities for feedback, ideally, that would be great.
Yeah, 100%.
Roadmap.
Let's see, in the chat, Kendall is saying the difference between primary and secondary sources. Amen, sister. How to find credible sources, how to evaluate, and I can't scroll down, so I'm gonna throw it to Addie to see how to evaluate.
Them how to synthesize sources without their own argument getting lost.
There
Oh,
we
yeah.
go.
Oh, yeah.
That's the dream, right? Absolutely. Other things you all think that you're trying to get your students to know in order to get to the stage of successful research?
Sorry, I just walked in.
No, please. Who are you and what is your discipline?
Gathering my thoughts, but one thought I had, and I'm sorry if you mentioned this already, is really the goal of the assignment. What is really the takeaway? If it's not the grade, then what is the takeaway?
Got it. Yes.
I love that answer.
Which is common sense, but sometimes we have to, highlight the common sense in class because people don't.
All right. I think we're all on the same page. I think that what we're going to talk about is not going to be a mystery to anybody, but we put our heads together to think about the kinds of things that we do and we help students with. And this is a lot of text. And the takeaway, the first thing that I think seems, maybe we all do it already, but it's worth saying again, scaffold your assignments. So if you want, as I do, I want that 10-page research paper with the secondary and primary sources and the synthesis. My classes have many little assignments that lead up to that so that I can break down the skills into steps. And we put down a sampler of things. Some of these are things that I do, some of these things that Megan does, and some of these things we would like to add to this list. So for instance, I'm teaching a class on a survey of 18th century European art this semester, and the goal is a 10-page research paper at the end. So there's actually lots of things that happen before any of these things get turned in by students. But for instance, I start with a paragraph topic proposal, like give me a sense of what you're interested in, some questions you want to ask. Give me in my field 3 artworks, 3 JPEGs of artworks that are examples to you, which are our primary sources and part of our primary sources. Give me an annotated bibliography. And Megan and I talked a lot about this, and she says synthesis matrix, and I don't even know what that is. So I might throw it to Megan to talk about what is a synthesis matrix.
Okay. We all know what annotated bibliography is. It's a classic, right? A synthesis matrix, it is a note-taking method. Click the link and see if that works.
Oh, look at that.
Yay. Okay. It is actually a note-taking method, but you can use it as an alternative to annotated bibliography as an assignment. And so I teach this in a lot of so it's basically taking notes by spreadsheet. And I'm going to point out a couple things of why this is beautiful. They are going to be able to see their notes across all of their sources. So a lot of students know I take notes at a source level. It's very difficult to see and synthesize across sources when you're kind of going and flipping around papers. I see lots of students that come in and they have 1,000 browser tabs. And so it offers them a way of organizing. What this does is it helps them keep track of it. It's encouraging them to find the big main idea, which a lot of students have trouble doing, or they kind of decontextualize it. And then the other part that's really, if you scroll to the right, the other thing that's on here is a column asking them to
Mac user.
Their, oh, gosh.
I know. No, it's my fault. It's my fault for not knowing my Dell. Okay, there we go.
Okay. The green column, it's asking what is my connections, my analysis to the other sources. And so it's similar to an annotated bibliography, but it makes it more visually clear when they're missing things that you want them doing. And so when they have a paper or when they have an annotated bibliography with a paragraph, it can get lost. It's like, where's your analysis? Where is your evaluation of this source? It becomes, and I tell them, it's like, it'll be obvious because the cell will be empty. Yeah. One of the slides, if you're writing this down, if you notice on the slides, there's QR codes that will take you back to things from the SMU Library's website that kind of supports where we're going. So I have a later slide where we have a guide all about taking notes, and there's templates for this for people to use. So
Megan, would you give us this template? Could you
Yeah.
email this to participants? Because I'd love to have this.
yeah.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Now I'm like, forget about the
Go up once. I'm going to point out, no, our list. Yeah. I'm going to talk about one other one because I really love it. And I feel like it's not one that everybody knows about. And that's the exploratory essay. This is one I learned about from John Bean, who wrote Engaging Ideas, which if you have not read this book, it's an amazing book on teaching writing at the college level. But the exploratory essay is a step in which instead of asking for an anti-bibliography or something like that, you're asking them to write about their process of exploring their research question and finding sources. What did that look like? How they're engaging from the sources and what they're learning from it. And so the beauty of something like this is it's really focused on the student and their own reflection. I mean, it's a little bit tricky to dump that into AI, right?
I was about to say, I mean, we're only barely going to touch on the problem of AI, which is another 1,000 other workshops, but that seems to me like an interesting, possibly AI proof assignment.
But it's beautiful because it gets the student focused in on their own thinking. And because I see teaching is a little bit like being a social scientist, you're kind of uncovering what's going on with your students. It's lifting the lid on your students' thinking about their sources. And the more that we understand their thought process and where maybe their thought process is going wrong or what they're misunderstanding allows us to address that in the classroom. So it gets you inside that, what's going on in their heads as they're doing their research.
Another thing that I have tried, and I will confess this is in small, yeah, please.
What was the name of the author you mentioned?
John Bean, Engaging Ideas. Lee, I have the book. I can show it to you. We have it in the library too.
Oh,
Awesome.
fantastic.
We'll talk.
B or John Bean?
John Bean, B-E-A-N. It's called Engaging Ideas. There's copies in the library. I believe there's even an ebook version that we have through the library.
Amazing.
I should have turned it into a QR code, y'all.
So another thing I have tried with success, but only in a small class. So one of the classes I teach is like the methods class for our majors in art history, which is sort of a capstone course. They take it as juniors or seniors. It's small. We don't want to have a huge major. And that is to ask students to do journal entries, which I actually do as forms of like Canvas discussions. I have them writing something every week. In that class, it's a little special because I have them pick an object in the DFW area to be the focus of their sustained research paper. And then every week I ask them to think about that object in terms of the reading for that week. So that could be adaptable to some other kinds of disciplines. It happened to work really well in this small seminar where students were choosing their topics pretty early on. The thing that I do and depending again on the size of the class, the amount of time that I have, is also to train students to evaluate secondary sources by starting with primary sources, starting with the ones I pick, basically the ones on the syllabus. So I know that they're good, that they have arguments, that they're, the correct kind of thing I want people to be looking for. And I ask them to write a précis. And when I think précis, I think it's like a short 500 words. And it's very regimented, and I'm not interested in anyone's feelings. I will just put that out there. I want a student to be able, who is this author? Where are they based? What is this publication venue? Tell me about this journal. And then I ask them for pretty rigid set of evaluations of a work, of a source, whether it's, this works best for secondary sources, what I'm about to say. Argument, what is the main argument? What kinds of evidence does the author use? Give me some examples. What do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of this particular argument? For a primary source, which of course is primary sources are inherently wacky and hard for students to get their mind around. I think it was Kendall's like, I'd like them to know the difference between a primary and secondary source. And in an ideal world, if I can have the time to do two précis, one of a primary, one of a secondary source, that helps, I think, cement the difference between those things in people's minds. But what I'm asking them to do is practice evaluating a source that I found with the goal that they're going to go out and find sources and be able to do the same thing.
One of the things that you put on there that I think is really great too, and it has broader disciplinary application, is you do visual analysis.
Mhm.
And that's practicing that, and feel free to talk
No,
about your
yeah.
own assignment. But I saw that and I was like, that's so great. And that has broad disciplinary application because you're getting it, like giving students a thing to practice analyzing, and how am I analyzing this thing and connecting. So in other disciplines that could be like, here's the data, take this and what does this mean, and write up what does this mean for this question, having them practice applying those sources analytically before they're doing their paper.
Yeah, this is a core skill of my discipline, obviously, and different for different disciplines, but I've thought about this in different ways. Even in 1000 level classes, I have them do like baby visual analysis, maybe as part of a Canvas discussion. In more advanced classes, I'll have them write. Sometimes I really push them in advanced classes. I'm like, you need to write 5 pages on a single work of art. I don't want you to cite any other sources. I want you to do visual analysis. And that is, since it's a core skill for any research in my discipline, I'm really happy with that product. We've been having a lot of discussions in our department about AI. Again, that's another question. But another thing my colleagues have done is done that as an in-class writing assignment. Like you have either an artwork that's part of your own research project, you the student, or we have one on the screen and you sit in class and do the visual analysis.
Yeah. And speaking of AI, this reflective writing piece at the end, it also helps the students focus on the actual learning, or what are you learning from this? What did you learn from doing this assignment? And especially if it's including references to things that we've talked about in class and all of that, it becomes like, did you actually write your paper? It was your work. It was your thinking. I want to see your thinking again. And so kind of the more we focus on what's going on inside your head, not just the product you're producing, helps us all and the students to focus on like, your learning is what really matters here.
I love that idea. And because I'm a slightly mean professor, I'm like, that would make an amazing question for a final exam after you've turned in your research paper. I will just add the sort of right before the reflective writing are the steps that I put in that are really kind of about improving writing. But when I have the time, I ask for a draft essay, like a full draft with all the apparatus. And then I have students peer review it in class, and I have a rubric that's quite elaborate in Canvas. And I don't know if you can even share things like that, but I bet Addie could tell me if we could share things like that on Canvas.
Yes.
I ask the students to evaluate each other's work. And that I think is good for, they're writing for somebody besides me. They know that they're going to have to explain themselves or convince somebody besides me. And grading all of this is a huge burden. I just want to put that out there. And if it's a labor question, I used to be so like, sometimes I would go and like, I'd really grade that first version of the essay. And then they'd have the peer review comments and my comments, the final essay, I maybe grade a little more lightly. That can work. I have also now started to think, well, maybe I don't grade the draft essay. Maybe it just gets peer reviewed and then they revise it, then they submit it to me, their final essay. But I do want to point out that pick and choose and think about your own labor practices, because this is a lot to evaluate. I feel like that's undercutting our point, but still, it's worth saying.
No, and I think it is a good point.
Yep.
I think it is a barrier for a lot of people assigning research. And in the rest of it, we have some examples of things of how do I do this in a low key way?
Mhm.
So there are other, this is higher key, but also pays off. But we have other low stakes ideas.
Let's see. Are there low stakes?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll put this back.
Could I ask you to elaborate on the peer review idea? 'Cause
Yeah.
I like that idea in principle. I'm not sure how to implement it. Could you, talk us
Yeah.
through it?
No, absolutely. Sorry, I have back issues, so I'm sitting on a chair, which is why now I have to peer over the screen at you. I've actually managed to do this in both like a 150 person class and like a tiny little class. So generally, what I do is I have them all turn in through Canvas their draft of their essay. And then you can assign peer reviewers within Canvas. And for a big class, I might just do it randomly. But for a small class, I do a little social engineering, either similar topics, or I confess sometimes I put higher level students together so that they are sharpening their knives against, other people who are at their level. And then I take time in class and I say, you have to read your groups. I usually do a group of 3. You have 2 essays to read and you fill out the rubric on Canvas before you come to class. When you come to class, you sit down with your group of 3 and you spend 10 minutes talking about each paper so that it doesn't take a lot of time in class because, well, people tend to be too nice and then not actually critique each other. But I do a little spiel. I'm like, think about it. It's great to be nice, but you want suggestions so that you can revise your paper better. So don't be too nice. And so I do a little sort of framing speech. And then I look at the peer reviews just to make sure that people have done them. Like, it's kind of part of my participation grades. I don't really hold students accountable to like, oh, did you respond productively to your peers? I just hope that that's happening without double checking it. What kind of feedback have you got? From students about it? I mean, generally positive. I've never had a comment where like, oh, I felt really put on the spot, or I didn't really like anybody else reading my work. I think in general, students have found it useful.
They tend to do that anyway with their friends. You're just formalizing it.
Yeah.
And giving them a structure by which they can be kind of more critical.
Other questions about the scaffolding on Zoom or in person? The next slide was also just more questions. How we came up with these ideas with our heads together. What about you all? What have you found has worked in terms of scaffolding assignments, and what maybe didn't work that we could cross off the list?
I mean, I tend to scaffold most of my assignments, and what has worked for me is being open up to the students that I'm going to be very critical in the initial assignments. I'm usually a harsh grader in the beginning, and then provide them with substantive feedback, and then grade loosely at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So the grades will be lower in the beginning, but expect that the grades are going to be higher later. But I would like for you to implement whatever feedback that I'm providing to you in any, changes that you make in the project.
Yeah. I would add to that when I do this, I put pretty low percentage weights for the smaller assignments, and even for when I'm doing a draft and a revision, the draft is usually worth half of a third of the grade of the final essay, so that it's a little bit low stakes, and so that I can do the same, and yet it doesn't really ding the students in the final grade.
That is interesting. And I've toyed with the idea of like, if you have a rubric, of using the same rubric for both, and maybe, weighting it differently or adding, because this is the draft, you're going to get an automatic more points, but so that they see if you had turned this paper at the final, it would have been this grade. Just know that is what that looks like, and then expect that you can then do better on the next one. But you're not the only person I've heard who does that. And then I will tell you, they come scurrying to the librarians because they're freaked out about that low grade.
I saw Kendall had something in the chat.
Because students do a lot of peer review, usually according to a set of criteria that she gives them in class. She likes the idea of having them use actual rubric and do it outside of class, so they can spend class time essentially conferencing with their group.
Yeah, I think that sounds smart. Any other suggestions or things that you've used in terms of building assignments toward research?
I'll give a shout out to Megan. I have found it so helpful to work with a research librarian when I'm thinking about assignments. So Megan happens to be here, not to make you blush or anything. But I have found, working with a librarian, a great sounding board really helps me to think through what I'm trying to get out of the assignment, and how the library end of it can help me with the research. So in terms of, I mean, honestly, so many of my recent assignments I've talked through with Megan, and that's been so helpful. And I think it's also helpful in terms of when students then go to her with questions, she knows where I'm coming from. She knows where the assignment is coming from and what's motivating it. I think that's helpful too, because I've had experience, long ago, when the librarian might not know what the assignment is really about, and then really sends the students off down a different path altogether, and that's obviously not helpful.
Yeah. Well, I did not pay her to say that. But and yeah, I think thanks for saying that. And we try to put out the message that research it's a team effort. It is really labor intensive to assign research. And I work with faculty who are like, I'm trying to do this, and I have students mobbing my office hours. It's like that we have librarians here to help with alleviate some of that just flat labor, but also, yes, the more we know, and it's makes my job easier too, makes us easier. So it's like it's teamwork.
And I would put a plug in for the Hammond Arts Library. We have a brand new librarian. Kate is her first name. I don't remember her
Kate
last
Allman.
name. She just replaced the wonderful Beverly Mitchell, and I haven't bugged her yet because she just got here. But Beverly used to come and even run a research workshop in my class, or we would go to the library and have spaces for that, so that just that thing you can know the librarian, and Hammond's even smaller. So the students, once they know where the library is, which is maybe we should have said that at the beginning. I now teach such big classes at the 3000 level that I can't literally walk to the library with my class, but I found that visceral exercise very useful if you have a smaller class, because maybe Fondren they actually come to because of Starbucks, but Hammond often they don't know. Let's see. Okay. We had also talked in our discussions about teaching students how to engage with the sources and how to think about and how to recognize, even at a basic level, what is scholarship in this discipline, in this class that I'm teaching them, and how do you read that? How do you talk about it in class? And then ultimately, how do you write about that? I will say in my classes, to get to this, a student to the point of even playing two scholars off of each other and coming up with their own original synthesis, that's like the golden snitch, and it doesn't really that's what I'm hoping for, but it requires a lot of baby steps and it doesn't always happen. But the baby steps can help students at every level. So what this goes to, for instance, every time I assign I've started now doing this, every reading assignments I have in class, which are usually, some classes have a textbook, but it's mostly a collection of scholarly essays that I'm giving them from journals or book chapters. And now I've gotten into the practice of every time I discuss a reading in class, I put the author's photo back, their website on the screen, so they know it's a real person, so they won't misgender the person, because I'm really tired of hearing all the authors referred to as he. And then we talk about, okay, what journal is this? What is 18th century studies? That's got a website too. Let's figure out. And I will bring, one of the struggles that I find, and I learned to research in a pre-internet era. I will date myself, but students who are dealing with a database like JSTOR don't know what a journal is, what an academic journal is, because they've never seen one in its as an entity. So I will often bring a paper copy of a journal to class and pass it around, which I don't think they're ever going to put their hands on one in their own research process, but I think conceptually it helps to see this essay was one in a special issue about something, and it was put together in this physical way. Once you've got students thinking about what this scholarship is, then you can get to the questions of how do you read strategically, how do you find main ideas. I have a rubric for that too, which was given to me by a friend who borrowed it from a historian at Virginia Tech or something, called Thomas, and I should have put this up here. Sometimes I shorten it to Toma, because you have to go through, I think it's topic is T, H is historiography, very hard to get students to talk about historiography, O is organization, M is methodology, A is, I forget what A is, and S are the stakes, like the so what. And I've had students, I've been surprised, because I thought this is a way to drag them through the steps you need to analyze an article. We'll do this in class. It takes a long time, but I have students, especially non-art historians, who'd be like, I love this. I didn't know that there was a way to do this. And especially I remember that student was in the hard sciences, and she was enchanted to find that there was a pattern for doing that. But then I have shortened it down to the whole Thomas or Toma discussion takes a long time in class, but I will get it down to what is the subject matter? Literally, what is this about? Then what are the evidence that's being produced, and end a discussion with what's the argument, in the hopes that that's going to train them to do that when they encounter a secondary source in the wild.
I would say, and those who know me know I can get up on a real soapbox about this, but I think if you do nothing else to prepare students for doing research, teaching them how to read the sources that they're supposed to go out and find is hugely critical. I have seen when we focus a lot on search and finding the thing, even if they kind of muddle about if you don't know what you're actually looking for, and if you can't recognize it and you can't read it for what it is, it doesn't matter. Like the rest of it doesn't matter. And so we're starting up front with like, what are you even looking for and understanding it? I think some of the surprising errors that students make with using sources in their research has to do with the fact that they're not really understanding what it is, or they're looking for it to match, or they have this very kind of transactional relationship with the sources. They'll go through and be like, oh, I can use this sentence and I can use this sentence. And you're like, it has nothing to do with what this thing is. And it's an empirical study and that's the data. And, you know, they take a lot of stuff out of context. And so there's two things that I emphasize too with the reading, that there's kind of two skills of reading, is that getting into that deep reading of like being able to take this thing and analyze the argument, which I'm sure is what you do a lot in your discipline. But there's also the skills in the upfront of when I am actually searching and I'm having to go through lists of results. How do I process all of this information overload that's coming at me? And how do I find those main ideas quickly is really important skills to have.
And that's exactly the moment where I hope when a student faces a screen, because you know when you put something into SMU libraries, which is where they'll start, you get 1,400 results, and I'm like, okay, you know, here's all the buttons to click on the left to narrow that down. Do you read French? Let's get rid of the French ones, et cetera, et cetera. But then you need the skills you hopefully got earlier, which is like, who is this author? What is this journal? Like, is this journal related to art history, or is this a random psychologist analyzing Van Gogh's ear and not actually relevant to what we're doing in the class?
Right.
Yeah.
And exactly what you're talking about is how scholars think. You're thinking at kind of multiple levels. You're thinking not just what it says, but who wrote it, where it's living in time, and then also how it's connecting to all the other things that are out there. And students can see it in a much more flat way. I think some of our really
100%.
bright students and the upper level students will get it, but it's very flat. Is it about my topic or not?
Which is how you get papers uploaded by homeschoolers onto the internet as a source, I think. And it's hard to think of every contingency, but hopefully teaching that kind of strategy of like, who is this person? Where did this, and this links into, I know, a lot of work that you do on basically information literacy. And
it is, but you know what, is a partnership, because librarians are not disciplinary experts. And so I think that's a thing that the more faculty are doing that in the class, and then it just helps the whole process, because as a disciplinary expert, you have the knowledge of like what's going on and where this is living within everything else we're talking about. But I think the ultimate answer to this is it's practice for the students. It's exposure, modeling, examples, and practice. And so some of the things we talked about, how do I fit all this into my class? And I think Amy mentioned earlier is using your course readings as a way of kind of helping teach this sort of thing. So even if maybe you're doing classes, and doing in-class work and practice is great. Like I've done classes where we go in and we have examples of putting students in groups, find the big main idea of this article, and then how does it actually connect? Is it relevant to the research question or not? Because that is also a very difficult skill for them to have. And just getting practice and hearing and having discussion around it helps prepare them. But you could even take your course readings and have reading guides for your course readings, and point those things out in the course readings. This is why it's a valuable source. This is who this is that has, you know, so that kind of work can help. Another great exercise is from John Bean. So shout out to John Bean, is having students work through what it says and what it does. And they focus a lot on what it says. And that's a whole other different skill. And that's really important, especially with those disciplinary things. What does this section actually do? Well, this section is actually talking about the methodology. I should not be, you know, pulling out this and then just dumping it in my paper without knowing what that actually is. So focusing on what it says and what it does exercises are good. I'll throw out a couple other exercises that I've learned about recently that maybe are less commonly known. There's something called a tear and share. So if you're working with synthesis is one of those things that's really tricky for students, and yet again, practice. So a tear and share is where you have students in groups, give a piece of paper, 4 quadrants, have 4 questions, have them answer the questions about the source, tear their paper, have one student synthesize everybody's question 1, Another student synthesize all of question 2, so that they're all, and then come back together. This is the synthesis. These are the answers, our group's answers to these questions. So they're seeing how other students have answered that and having to decide amongst themselves, what's the best answer to this? How do we push back? And so anything like this where we're getting practice dealing with that and actually getting in there and getting out of those sources what we want.
There was, we have in our notes, do this if nothing else, exclamation point. So I think this is an excellent time to talk about this, because it's something Megan was talking about when we were preparing, and I realized to my shame, I don't actually do, but it makes a lot of sense.
You don't have to do it. I'm just very emphatic.
No, I mean, you convinced me.
So this was give examples of good student work. So we're talking about reading and writing. So we talked about, we'd use your course readings as examples. Give an example of actual good student work. So because what I see a lot is students trying so hard to produce a thing that they've never seen before. And there's lots of directions and they misinterpret things. Things go in a weird way sometimes. And so if we had an example, and this also helps with academic support, so me, the librarians, and with the writing center, to get a better idea of the kind of thing you're trying to get the students to write. And so even better would be to have annotations in there. Give an annotated example of what it does. What is this section doing? Giving examples of how evidence is being used. I have lots of students ask me, like, what does good enough look like? That example will help them see the moves that they're trying to make in their own writing.
It strikes me that, I mean, I by the end of the semester, I'm always so frazzled that I have no foresight to do this, but it does seem like, all right, when I finish this class, I should find a couple of good students' papers, ask their permission. They live forever on Canvas, right? And then I will know the next time around when I'm teaching that class or a class like that, Kevin gave me permission to share their paper as an example of, like, this is a wonderful 9-page research paper, and see what they've done here.
And it takes none of your class time.
I see a question from Zoom from Kellen. This is my first time teaching, or maybe I'll let Addie, because it just disappeared on our screen.
Yeah,
Sorry.
this is my first time teaching the CR course being offered out of Lyle, and I'd love to share model essay, but don't have access to any.
Oh,
Do you have
yeah.
any recommendations on how to source some? I've looked online, but lose momentum after reading a few poor sample essays.
I suggest reaching out to Lydia Allen, because she has some examples and she may have ones that make sense for engineering.
It's Lydia Allen, and she's in the library.
Lydia Allen
Director
is
of the Writing Center.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I know she has examples.
I think it might be time for another slide. It's
Yeah,
possible
yeah.
we did it. Okay, come on, another slide. There we go. Now we're getting to the part where we're talking about how to formulate a research question. And when we were talking about this problem, this is something like, in my case, it's something I'm asking students to do in a topic proposal well before they start their research. So one of the things that Megan was talking about was thinking about this as pre-search, right? As opposed to, and when we were brainstorming, like, okay, we can remind students of the research questions that drove the essays we read together. For instance, when I teach a secondary source that is focused, like a scholarly article that's about a single artwork, I'd be like, I try to remember as we're reading and be like, look, this Sarah Cohen article is only about this one painting by Chardin, and she kind of explodes out from out of it, but always brings it back to this one painting. That's one way you can formulate a research question. Look, this other article is more thematic, that kind of thing. So that research can happen as you're just going through your course readings.
Yeah, and I was going to say, one of the important things that to think about is, as students move from discipline to discipline, there's different kind of research questions that are expected or that are acceptable depending on the discipline. We have a guide, and that QR code goes to it in the libraries that outlines different types of research questions. So even having examples of what acceptable questions look like. So for example, one of the things I run into is students wanting to have like a kind of a value attached to their question, or what should we do? And a lot of times for some of the assignments they're working with, that is not what they're looking for. So having kind of explicit questions about what kinds of questions are we talking about? What quality of question? The other thing that I like to emphasize with this particular thing is students need to do research in order to come up with a decent question. They don't know enough of the subject yet to come up with this kind of beautiful thing. And so they do what I call exploratory research, in which they are just going out and seeing what are people talking about? What is the shape of the topics? I'm just out curious and trying to discover things that are of interest. Typically, when students start researching, they want to find citations right away. They're like, well, I want to skip to the end and write my paper. And it's like, you are not ready to do that yet. And so this is like kind of a, like, I like teach 2 stages of research. And so if you go to the next slide.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think we
I
should.
have a new picture.
I
in
saw
there.
this. I was like, my God, woman, what is this?
I know. What is this thing? So one of the things they tend to get over, just look at, don't read the thing, just see it for, this is a concept map is what this is. It's an example of a concept map. And so one of the things is they go out to explore and they get overwhelmed and they start picking sources, and what you're really trying to have them do is get at the 30,000 foot view at this point, right? What is the shape of this? And so the concept map gives them something to do as they're picking out the shape. You're just writing down, what is your topic? What are the ideas that are coming up, and how are you organizing that? Which is actually a really great activity for getting them to think analytically about what are the subtopics, what belongs together, what doesn't belong together. And it gives them something to do as they're exploring. And I say, usually you may be doing just one part of your concept map. Usually like you're just gonna do one arm, and that's okay. And so this has been really helpful. Another exercise that's helpful for them seeing and scoping their research question is a very quick exercise that you have them write. I am working on the topic of blank because I want to find out blank so that my reader can understand or do blank. And this moves them from this idea of an all about, this is my topic. Okay, that's a fine place to start, but you want to find out what specifically within that, and what is the so what behind that? Why does this matter behind that?
I
So
like that. That would take like 4 minutes. In
oh
class.
yeah, it's quick. Yeah, and it's really useful.
I'm gonna
Yeah, let's
speed
keep
a
going.
little bit. Oh, so one of the things we thought about is students, when a student sits down to search, and usually it sits down in front of their computer or on their phone, and it's like, okay, now I'm going to search things. And there are a lot of things to consider. And Megan put a list together of common problems that students have when they sit down with the SMU library search bar.
Yeah, I think the big thing, and sometimes that we take for granted, is that when students go and have to search, that the way they're having to do that looks very different than if you really know your subject area. And so common problems, and I will tell you, having seen it and worked directly with students, I cannot emphasize enough that they really struggle with some of this stuff. Things that we take for granted, like understanding the task, is actually really tricky for a lot of students. This determining relevance to the task. And for us, finding the main idea and determining relevance is synonymous, right? Here's the idea, it's immediate relevant. It is not synonymous for students. It is 2 separate things. And I think some of it is, as we go through this, is thinking about their cognitive overload when they go into these kind of research environments. They are having to read things that are quite difficult. They're having to search in a way that's very different than what they're used to. And so if they had infinite time, they could perform quite well, but they don't have infinite time. And I think that sometimes when we see a lot of the problems is because they're having to, work so hard to move through it.
On a practical level, I'd say like I started off assuming, oh, students are so digitally literate, they're going to be able to good at searching. They're terrible at searching. And that's a mean thing to say. We're all pretty terrible at searching, and introducing them in class. I take them through the SMU Library's website and try to talk about what the fire hose means. Like what is the algorithm? How are these? And I only have a dim understanding of some of these things, but I think it's important to convey that the search engines have biases. They only are as good as what you tell them to do, which is all actually applicable to AI as well. And to talk about like, what are you getting? When you look for articles, Well, there are these databases full of scanned journals out there, and that is what you're going to get, but you have to check peer reviewed in order to not get Smithsonian Magazine, that kind of thing. Let's see, let's make sure.
And I would say they're good at searching for the kind of things that they search in their own lives, but academic search is so different.
Yeah.
I'm sure if I asked them to help me use TikTok, they'd be amazing at that. But
I don't use TikTok, but I'm pretty sure you could just present you with stuff.
I don't use it either.
Oh my God, we're so old. Okay. The practical ways, and this is a segue, and I know we're a little, should we officially end at 12:50 or should we go?
Sometimes there's a class right after.
Yeah.
So if
We'll try to-
professor just walks barging in, then.
We'll try to wrap it up in the next 3 minutes so that there can be time for even more questions. So I had to follow up on Megan's sort of introduction to the conceptual problems. I had a list of kind of practical things that I do in class. For instance, as I said, I'm teaching right now a 40-person class how to do a research paper. I can't actually take them to the library. It's just too complicated to fit them into the spaces. However, I bring books to them, and I did like a little exercise this semester where I grabbed a bunch of books off my shelves and like evaluate in groups. What is this? Is this a coffee table book, which is a really big problem in art history? Is it a book full of pictures? Does it have footnotes? Does it have a bibliography? When was it published? Who published it? That kind of thing, to sort of get them ready to either when they're looking at a search engine or they're actually in the library to be like, this book is better for my purposes or just in general than this one. Other things you hope, I fall back on what I hope they've learned by doing the Tracy exercises on secondary sources. And then I also, when I'm giving them the final research paper prompt, I try to keep it short-ish because I think the temptation is to get to develop a prompt that's like 3 pages long to cover every eventuality, and nobody will read that. But I try to give sort of examples of like, what do you like? What's a good source? What's a not a good source? What are you looking for here? Then there are some things that Megan had that were beyond my ken.
I will. In addition to this, so a lot of what Amy's talking about is practice, discussion and practice. I will add also that it's really important for students to learn how the evaluation is actually connected to the context by which you're using it. And that helps us move beyond that flat, like, well, my professor said it has to be peer reviewed. And it's like, well, but that doesn't make sense in this case. And so developing that kind of peer reviewed, if this is what you're doing, and connect it to the purpose of the publication matters for this specific context. So as you're having those discussions and practice, why is this okay here, but over here we need something different, and having those kind of discussions. The other thing I'll point out is Bizip's BEAM method. You can even Google it. It's out there.
It's BEAM.
BEAM, that sources I need background information, I need evidence, and think those are our primary sources. I need analysis and method. And the idea is that it's actually helping them to think about the source and how it's actually used in the context of my writing. So not just primary and secondary, which can be like a slippery slope, right? It is, those exhibits are illustrative of the point I'm making. And so it's connecting. I have to perform my analysis on it. The analysis sources are the ones that I'm engaging in conversation. So, and when you teach this way, you can start to have really interesting conversations with the students, because they'll be like, well, this source, how is this performing? It's like, well, actually, this part of it is evidence. This piece of data that you're citing here, as that you're pulling out of that source, is acting as illustration. You have to analyze that. You have to connect that. This part is somebody else's interpretation of that data. You have to respond to that. Those are the voices that you're in conversation with. So it gets them to this kind of more sophisticated level of those sources and how I'm actually using it in my own writing.
I think that our very last slide was this.
Yes.
Which we're not going to talk about, but we're all thinking about it, right? What impact is AI going to have on how we teach student research, how we evaluate it, and how basically, well, how we might use it and how we might combat it. And what we had to say was it can, well, Megan says it can make students' research better. I'm like, really? Show me that.
I can.
I'm so grumpy. And I think I feel like we're on we're the threshold of a new era of teaching students research. Maybe we've already crossed it, but I can speak for myself. I have not yet crossed it, and not all my students have either. So I think this is something we're going to have to think about over the next 12 months to 3 years.
I think the big thing that I have
Yeah.
side eye too.
Yeah.
So, like, the big thing is there are tools out there that actually make search better. It will bring students to a more relevant result and than what they might naturally do in a regular database, for example. That will produce summaries that will help them get closer. And so the thing that I've been thinking about is, and it's kind of like writing, if I have AI that helps make my writing more polished, because I can run it back through and be like, what's a different way of saying this, or what's it? We have to raise our expectations of writing. And in the same way, it is possible that as they start using these tools more, our level of what we expect from their research needs to come up too. It's like, okay, yes, you're not finding things that are completely irrelevant. You got a lot closer because a tool helped you get there. Now I can start asking for more from you in terms of that critical inquiry into those sources. So
That's an exciting and positive spin.
I
think that we
know,
want
right?
to,
There you go.
but I think our most important message here at the very end is, even in the face of AI, and I think we're all like struggle to figure out what's this going to do for us. Please don't give up assigning research projects. And this is conversations we're having in my department too. And I am not ready to let go. And I don't think anybody should let go of the idea that students should have ideas that they're passionate about, go out and research them and formulate them into a final project that communicates original research and argumentation to other people, whether that be my 10-page research paper or a podcast, or, whatever form that takes for you.
I want to be in that class with a podcast.
I think that's all we have. Are there any? We have maybe a moment for like 1 or 2 questions, if anybody has some.
Questions online?
I will, as a final plug, let you know, SMU Libraries, we create Canvas tutorials related to research and research writing. And so we have pre-made things that you can pull into your course to help support and help scaffold the assignments that you're making. So there may be some things in there. So you can go to our website and find out information about that, or contact your subject librarian. So I'll put that out.
And I did not even know about
They're
this.
saying thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks to you. Thank you. Yay. Yay.